What's up, everybody? Welcome to PowerShell Wednesdays. This week at PowerShell Wednesday, we have our very own Morten, who's going to be giving us a 101 on MSGraph using PowerShell, Microsoft Graph, getting started, getting going. Morten, take it away, man.
Will do. Tonight we're going to cover the basics, introduction to MSGraph, a bit about installing the authentication part, finding commands that are available to you, and finding the necessary permissions that you actually need to run a certain command. We're doing a bit of filtering, and then we're actually, with the complex parameters, just trying to send an email. It's going to be an error, just a little spoilers, and then we'll try and debug it. Just a question for the chat. Let us know how far you've gone with MSGraph. Are you an expert? Are you a beginner, or just messing about with it a bit? Have never heard of it for that matter.
First heard of it. That's awesome.
Okay.
That's awesome. Yeah, there's oftentimes a lot of tools that people have access to that can do a lot. Just got to be introduced to them a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, if you know anything about Azure, it's basically your one point of entry, or at least I hope it's going to be one point of entry. We also have the AC module, AZ for other countries, which also covers Azure, but MSGraph is basically your go-to shop for most of the endpoints in Azure. To get started with it, you can just run install module Microsoft Graph, specify your scope as current user to only install it on your own user instance on your machine. If you're on a shared machine, that will help you a lot if you need to update it at some point. Second off, if we want to, the MSGraph is divided currently in two separate versions of the API. We have the version 1.0, and then we have the beta version. If you ever need to use any beta commands, we also need to install the Microsoft Graph beta package. Once that is done, you can just import the module. A quick suggestion on that part is only import the modules that you actually need, because if we just take a look at the installed module and try and look at ms.graph, just put a wildcard at the end. There's loads of packages. So if you're going to run import module in Microsoft Graph, you'll import a subset of all of these modules as well, which I did for before the presentation just to not waste time. Took 4 minutes and 50 seconds. If I just needed the Microsoft Graph authentication, which we'll be using for authenticating to MSGraph, it took 14 milliseconds. So just import the modules that you actually need and not all of them to save some time. And just as a little hint, if we try and look at how many commands there is in MSGraph with the beta endpoints, just by installing these two packages, we suddenly have 25,000 commands available to us. Quite a lot. Nobody's going to remember every one of them and how they look. So definitely confer with the documentation for each of the commands. And you can find it on the MS-Learn.
Also, I posted a link to your code, and it'll be in the link below if this is on YouTube. But you were kind enough.
Yeah.
So if people want to follow along, copy paste, it's right there.
Sounds great. Thank you. And just to delve a bit into the authentication part, we have, I would say, 3 primary ways of authenticating. We can authenticate as a user, myself, which will go into the delegated scope of permissions. I'll get back to that later, just so you don't think you missed something. And then we have the application scope for MSGraph endpoints. And within those, we have 3 ways of authenticating currently. We have authenticating with a client secret, and we have authenticating with a certificate. And then there's a new one, came about a couple of months ago, called federated credentials. I won't be covering that part in this demo, as it's getting started. But just to get started with connecting to MSGraph, we can use Connect-MgGraph. We don't have to specify scopes. It's a good practice to do, so you actually know which permissions you are allowing or using in this given scope that you're actually working with MSGraph. And then you don't have to specify your tenant ID. I'm doing it because I'm working on multiple tenants, so it's nice to actually specify it. Running that will normally pop up in a web browser. I did authentication a bit earlier, so it remembered my token from earlier. And I'm authenticated now, so I could be running something like get-mg-user, and I'll receive all the users in my tenant.
Can you zoom just a little
This
bit?
is just I can try at least. Doesn't look good.
I think that looks all right.
Is it bad? Great. So currently I am authenticated after running this command, and I can see my user in my tenant. I connected with the user read all delegated scope, and I also have permissions on my current user that I'm authenticated with, the airbag permission to actually read everything in my tenant. So per se, I didn't need this scope. Moving on to client secret, we have an app ID and we have a secret. And let me just disconnect from MSGraph first. Did I close that one? I did. So specifying our tenant ID, or app ID, and our client secret, we can create a credential object. You could also just be running get credential, saving that to a variable, and then typing in your credentials down here. That would work as well. But for my instance, I'm doing it to automate, so I don't want to be typing in credentials manually. Creating a credential object like this, quite easy. You can also look at the GitHub code just to get started with it if you need an example. And then we can run Connect-MgGraph or tenant ID again, and then a client secret credential object. Running that, and we're connected again, and we could be running get-mg-user once again, this time in a application scope. And just for certification, I haven't actually set it up yet on my own tenant. First, we'll need a certificate. In this, I'm making a self-signed certificate. If you're doing it in production, I would definitely recommend reaching out to your certificate authority people. It's most likely your AD team or whatever they're called to get you an actual certificate and not just using a self-signed one. But running those two commands created a certificate, which is stored in my current user under my, and exported with, you see here, exported the certificate right away to this. And if we go into Azure, just a moment, we can go into the section called App Registrations. And just to do it on the application I'm actually using for the secret as well. To create your secret, you just press on the new client secret, give it some kind of description, press add, and you have a secret that you can use. For the certificates, we go over to the certificate page instead, press on upload a certificate, and then just find it in your folder. This one I exported to the given folder I'm working in, so quite easy to find. Once that is done, you should be able to, if we disconnect MSGraph again, then we should actually be able to connect MSGraph with our app ID again, same app ID, same tenant ID, but this time with the search subject, which is the thumbprint of the certificate. And we connected once again. And can read out our users again. Any questions so far?
No questions, but I kind of want to recap because I think this is a really important part that people kind of struggle with. What do you think when people get started? What I've seen is people get started by interactively typing in your creds, start playing around with Microsoft Graph, start the convos so you can actually explore automation, because basically to automate it, you can't interactively type your password, right? You're going to need to go for something like the certificate approach. Is that fair?
Yeah, the easiest way to get started with the automation part is definitely using a client secret, because it's basically just a string that you need to adhere to an object. The certificate can be a bit more complicated, as it needs to be installed on the user, or rather on the machine that needs to run it in the user context that is running your code. So you can't just run it from any user on the machine, you have to run it from that specific user. As far as I know, at least. You could also import the certificate into your current PowerShell session, but that requires you to have the certificate available as a file somewhere on your PC. And if anybody else has access to your PC, then they also have access to the certificate.
Okay. So if you're
definitely, for getting started, just use a secret. It's easy. Once you're a bit more adept at it, move over to credentials.
Yeah, because I think there's a ton you can do without having to go to that next level. And if the confusion of that is what's holding you back, get started, dabble more, come up with solutions, get used to connecting in your machine and doing things in your environment. And then once you have those tools kind of ready, your processes automated, it can be a little bit more of an easy sell to get the other stuff done.
Agreed. Well, moving on to finding some commands. Just to have a look at the documentation. It's right here. Also linked in the GitHub code. We have a find MGGraph command, which accepts a URL or URI parameter. Can't talk today. Which you can pass some wildcards to, and the wildcards looks a bit special, let's say it like that, because it's a dot and then a star, which can be a bit confusing if you haven't used it before. But you can also be specific and saying, I only need the ones where the URL is actually user/ID. By running that command, we get since I have both the version 1 of the API and the beta API available, and I haven't specified an API version I want to use, I get both of the results for it. So I can see the commands out here. Command called get-mg-user, remove mg-user, update mg-user. The method that it's using, it's a bit more about the API backend that the PowerShell module is wrapped about, and the actually URL that the commands are hitting. We could also do it the other way around and then specify a specific command that we want to run. This can be useful if you ever need to use the invoke MSGraph REST method command, I believe it's called, as you can get the URL that you're actually wanting to hit in the backend. And moving on from that, if we want to be a bit more general and actually want to search our way to the actual commands that we want to use, we know we want to do something about a user. So by running find MGGraph command, wildcard, user, wildcard, we get all the commands in all the modules that we have installed that contains anything with user. If we want to dive a bit deeper in it, we can add even more to it. So we are saying wildcard, user, wildcard, member of wildcard. So our command could look something like I'm missing my
I told everybody you have all these memorized.
At least. No, definitely not. But we could dive a bit deeper into it and then say, well, we know it's user and we need the member of something, and we could actually look through the different endpoints here. Since we want to use something that contains something with unit as well, we can just add it to the commands, and suddenly from, I don't know, 100 commands to 50 commands down to maybe 10 commands, and then you're pretty much able to guess the last part to actually find your command or the command you actually want to use. Any questions here?
No question, but I can say that it seems weird that a find command would be so important, but seriously, it is so important. It is like the kind of get help, but you actually need this to use the graph. You can't just stumble your way into finding things. You actually have to use find MGGraph command, I found. Like, it is so core to the workflow of actually using it.
Especially if you have both V1 and beta endpoints, because you end up with just 25,000 commands. There's no way to get help and get command on that. If we wanted to dive a bit deeper in it, this time we are only looking for the get commands. So we're specifying the method, typing in get. Could be post, it could be patch, it could be update for that matter. And specifying the API version. This time we only want to look at the production endpoint. And again, we get a lot of commands, still a lot of commands, and end up with only 5, 6 commands. Makes sense so far?
Is there a predictor for the Microsoft Graph, the MGGraph commands?
I'm guessing so. It might be my PS read line.
Mike Robbins asked, so I think Mike Robbins knows. So I don't know, Mike, is there?
I mean, there is this IntelliSense, so maybe.
I think there might be something for PS read line he might be referring to, but we'll find out.
Sure. Sounds good to me, at least. Moving on to permissions. Probably the thing that confuses most people. We have a command called find-MgGraph permission, which returns all of the available permissions, whether it's an application permission or it's a, just format this to a list instead, because you can see it's a bit long. It'll have an ID. This is a app role ID on the Microsoft Graph application that I'm guessing all tenants have in Azure. It's a role with this ID. It has a permission type. So in this instance, it's an application. It could also be the permission type delegated. The difference between the two is if you're connecting as your own user or a service user or something else, it will always be delegated permissions. They are, let's compare them to RBAC roles in Azure. So you can give user read permissions or user read write permissions to a specific person, but you can also do it on a delegated level on an application, and then delegate permissions to this application instead. So the application actually contains the permissions, and then you can add users to the application. That's the delegated scopes. The application scope is typically where you connect with either a client secret, a certificate, or a federated credential. And then you have the consent type. The two options there are is the user and the admin. A admin has to consent a given permission is assigned to a given application, but a user can consent on their own term. So let's say we have a permission called user.read. It doesn't necessarily require an admin consent. It just requires a user consent. So when a user logs into an application in Azure, where the consent type is user, he can just press, yeah, I'll give consent that the application can read this information from my account. Whereas the admin consent will require a privileged role administrator combined with the application administrator or a global administrator to actually consent to the given permission on the application. Then we have the name For the permission, in this instance, it's workforce, integration, read, write, all, and then a short description on what this application actually allows. All of this information is also available when you assign permissions in MSGraph. Diving into the commands, if we wanted to, at this time, we actually don't need to use the wildcards. It looks kind of at the application names or app registration permission names rather. So if I were to type Windows Updates instead of calendar, it would output this permission along with some others that are similarly named. Just running this one. We have gotten the delegated permissions. These are most likely the ones assigned to a given user on an application. And in this instance, a user can actually authorize this permission as well. If we look at the application permission instead, we can see that an administrator needs to actually allow this permission on the given app registration, because it's a bigger scope than just allowing the application to get access to the given user. This time we're given access to all users in our tenant instead. And we can also add the switch permission type, differing between delegated and application. And nothing interesting there. Basically the same result, just split up a bit more. If we're unsure about a certain permission, we also have, for some permissions, I know it's not for all, but for some at least, we can run the find MSGraph command with the command parameter. Run, for example, get mg user calendar, select an object, expand the property permissions because it has a permission tab. So if we just run this one, formatted, you can see it has a permission tab. In this instance, there's actually two different ones, because it also has one for calendar ID and it has one without a specific calendar. The calendar ID doesn't have permission specified, so we actually need to return all of them, unfortunately. The one just hitting calendars actually has the permissions assigned here. And then we select the name of the permission type, if it's an admin or description, and full description. And then we just sort the object based on the permission type. Running that will give us this result. It actually look at both of the get MG user calendars, and then just filtered out the permissions from the second one here, as the first one was empty. Has permissions type application. It's a read basic, read write, and read chat. With this, you could actually go the step further and just look at the find MgGraph permission and then just take this one, for example. So you can dive deeper into the actual permission for a given command. Any questions so far? Guessing not?
There are some questions that cover creating and assigning permissions with creating apps.
Great.
That was it wasn't really a question.
Not too wrong, at least. And if we authenticate as well, again, to the MgGraph, we also have a context that we are authenticated in. Every time you connect, you have a context that for your connection, and running the get context returns a bunch of information on how you actually connected. And by running it, we can see it's an interactive browser, and the authentication type is delegated. So in this instance, all of the permissions that I am allowed to use on the applications will only be the delegated permissions and not the application permissions. And by running the expand property scopes, we can actually see which scopes my user actually has permissions to in this given context. And if we were to authenticate interactively again as the delegated scope and try and run with the scope mail read shared, read write shared, if we just try and find an MSGraph permission on that endpoint, we can see that the consent type is actually set to user. So in theory, I should be able to get the consent time or permission requested at least and consent on my own behalf without having an administrator having to grant admin consent on the given application. Not sure what happened there, to be honest. Seems like it worked. Definitely did work. Not sure why the URL timed out, but now we authenticated the mail read write shared permission as well, as we have granted the application permissions to this endpoint as well. And if we wanted to look at all of the auth permissions that a given user has given permission to, so currently I have given permissions to these 5 endpoints. Unfortunately, it doesn't work in my test tenant for some reason. Not exactly sure why. So I tried copying the output from my production tenant instead on my own user, and had a few different set of permissions granted in the OAuth context or delegated context for my user based on the applications I log into at work. They're not quite unique, but they are unique enough. I tried to specify the uniqueness at the end, but since these are all a collection of permissions grouped together, we see a multitude of permissions, for example, user read basic all, offline access, OpenID, and profile. The profile, OpenID, and offline access will most likely be some kind of also the user read basic all as well. Will most likely be most of your SSO integrated apps in Azure that you actually log into. And if we wanted to see which permissions that a given user could actually consent to on their own behalf, we could run find MSGraph permission. We are looking at the endpoint user with the permission type delegated, and just saying where object consent equals user. Doing that will return these endpoints. Not sure who will find it necessarily beneficial for them, but it can be nice to know sometimes that, well, your users are actually allowed to consent to all of these applications and these permissions. You can specify a bit stricter policy on which permissions a given user can actually consent to, but that's likely more up to your senior sysadmin on that part. And we can of course do the same for application permissions that actually require an admin consent. Let me know if there's any questions.
So far, so good.
Great. Moving on, just to introduce a bit of filtering in the MSGraph. Normally, you're probably used to running where object or something similar, saying something like country equals United States. The problem doing it that way, at least in PowerShell with the module, is that it will still return all users. It will return all objects to you, and then you filter them, which can cost a lot of resources on the MSGraph endpoint. Getting a bit more into it a bit later, but just announcing that you actually have a filter operation where you can say that the country of a given user needs to be equals United States. And as you might notice, it it is a bit different from how it would normally look in PowerShell, as we don't have any $_.country. We don't have any dashes on the equal sign. The string here looks fine in regards to PowerShell as well. But with this filter, we'll only get the users in the tenant that are actually from the United States. And if we wanted to delve a bit deeper into the filters, these filters can get pretty complicated and pretty long. For this one, we're saying that we want MG users with the filter account enable. It has to be true. It can either be true and false. And the starts with property for the property city has to be PI. And further than that, the department has to start with marketing. And running that will suddenly limit us to only one user instead of the, 10 users above.
Morten, can I be honest?
And
I'm just going to copy and paste what you did and change the values. that syntax is weird, man. It's a whole new thing. Just copy and paste the code.
I mean, I completely agree. But jumping a bit further into it, I'll just show a quick tip on how to actually generate the samples, or at least the filters. If you go ahead and
can you Control+ a couple times on this?
Yeah, just give me a second.
Wow,
it's at the wrong side.
So you pressed F12?
Yeah, if you press F12 or press on the it's more tools. Am I just blind, or can't I find the developer console in the browser?
I have no clue. I just press F12.
Yeah, I do as well. That's a keyboard shortcut, F12. If you can't press F12 for some reason, maybe your cat broke the keyboard or something. If you press the three buttons, more tools, developer tools, go to the network pane. I can't actually, I can zoom on this one. Go to the network pane, press on fetch XHR, as it'll filter out some of the queries that you're actually using. Now we are in the users pane, and we can just add a filter, account enable, apply. A city has to start with, let's say, PI. And if we take a look at the batch request section, under the request here, just right click on it, expand recursively, we can see the endpoint that it's actually setting. So it's setting users, it's selecting a couple of properties, it's saying top 40, so it only returns 40 users. And then we have the actual filter here, which you can just copy and paste it into a string here. Then you have the count true, you can just remove it, as we don't actually need it. The order by might be nice for you. If you want to use it, you'll have to uncomment the $sign with a, I'm not sure what that is called. We never use it in Denmark.
Tilde.
We only use it for PowerShell. Yeah, exactly. And now we have the same filter. It doesn't like the answer. Great. Demo guards, please.
It's a backtick. I lied, by the way. It's not a tilde. Yikes. Sorry.
Damn. You led me astray. Actually, it's because it's a filter. It's not. Yeah, it's a bit stupid, but each of the $signs is a unique value in the MSGraph API. So every time you see an AND symbol, it's actually going to use another parameter. So if we wanted to use the order by, I think there is an order by on the, might not be actually, doesn't have a order by, but it has the top. You can just say 5 as well. So just take anything that is in between the @ symbol. And let's see here. We have our $ filter equals account enabled equals true and starts with city, yada, and then you have your @ sign, so you don't need anything else. This is all this to your query. And these can, actually not sure what the default user starts with, but you can add as many filters as you'd like in here, and you'll have it for free in your browser. Actually think maybe it might be easier to look at one of these. Nah, fortunately not. But you'll have it right here. Any questions for that part?
I think Gilbert highlighted Graph X-ray as well as another way to kind of dive into things.
Yep. Unfortunately, it doesn't work if your company has some restrictions on the desktop in regards to which extensions you can install in your browser. Lucky me. And just to note down some of the typical limitations or performance limitations you might run into in regards to using the MSGraph. If you were to filter on a user type that is equals to guest in PowerShell, the regular way, I would say, you'll end up, I did this on my production tenant as well, but we're saying get MG user. We want all of our users. We want a property. We have to add this property as by default, the get MG user will only return a subset of properties. So if we need anything else, like the AD, we have to specify it. In this instance, we want the user type because we want to filter on it. Where object, the user type is equals to guest. This in my production tenant at least returned 23,000 users. And just to show how long it took a minute, 3 seconds, 548 milliseconds. A better way to do the exact same would be to run get MG user, again specifying all, and then using the filter property user type equals guest. It's the same result, but it took only 25 seconds and 776 milliseconds. So I mean, there's a huge difference in how you sort it or filter your result. If you filter it using the MSGraph, you'll get your result much quicker. If you use PowerShell for it, you're actually using both more resources in MSGraph, but you're also using more resources in your own session in PowerShell. So do it the correct way, not the old way for MSGraph. Moving on to something, I thought so at least. I was a bit amazed about how long of a time it actually took just to run that part, and it's only a single command.
Yep. I think there's like, from what I'm seeing in Graph, there's a lot you can do, but there's a lot of gotchas and sort of things you need to be aware of going into it.
Definitely. Moving on to a bit more of a complex parameter. I'm not going into how you actually create it. I would refer to the documentation for this part. But this is more of a way to show you how you can troubleshoot on the a bit more complex parameters that you're using for a given command. This parameter or set is actually just to send one email using the MSGraph. We're specifying a subject. We're specifying the content type is HTML, and we're adding some HTML within the actual email. And we're specifying that it's 2 recipients, which is packed in. All of them is packed in with an email address, and the address in this instance is my test user. And I save the item to the sent items. If I run this, I won't return an error yet. If I run the set MG user email, user ID test user, and the params right there, I will end up getting an error. In this instance, it's an access denied. which is nice because it actually shows us that I don't have permissions for this part. If I were to authenticate a user that actually has permission for it, I'm actually not sure which one I was supposed to connect with, now that I think about it. But let's try it again. God damn it. Might have to, actually, this was the correct error message I was expecting, at least. We received a bad request, and we're just getting to know that at least one recipient is not valid, but we already specified one recipient. In this instance, it will actually tell you, give you a bit of help, that the recipient is some strange value. In this case, it's just the user ID of the user. But it doesn't tell you what it actually expects. If you were to run the same command with the debug parameter, press A just to say yes to all, we can see that the HTTP method is post. The absolute URL is graph Microsoft.com. We want users, the user ID of the user I'm actually sending for, and the operation in MSGraph that's called Microsoft Graph.sendMail. We can see our specified body that we're trying to send with this command. And right here, it's quite obvious that our email address is actually wrong. So correcting that part and trying to send it again. And just to show a bit more, let me just see if we have the documentation here. We can see that the actual body needs to look like this. And if we wanted to see the API documentation for it instead, we could just Google that as well. And we could see how the body was supposed to look right here. Does it make sense?
Question, is there a licensing requirement to be able to send email with Graph?
As far as I know, there isn't a license requirement because it just requires a user ID. It doesn't necessarily specify that I have to have an email, but I'm not entirely sure, to be honest.
Good thing to test out. Copy and paste some code and see if it works.
I could, yes. And just to show the email, do I have the I can't actually show the inbox because this is not an actual domain that I can use to send emails, as it's just a development tenant. But I can see send items. I can also see that this message was not delivered to recipients. But just to show that the email was actually sent using MSGraph, which in this instance is why I actually saved it to send items, just to be able to show it. And I actually think that is all I had for now. And I think it's the time is over as well.
Well, excellently covered. I'll let the content simmer for a little bit, let people ask questions if they bubble up.
Of course.
But great job, man. I think that, like we said earlier, like Graph is approachable, but you kind of need to be aware of a lot of things along the way. Even just something like authenticating is challenging and can be confusing. You kind of broke that down. Finding what commands to run, also a challenge. Also, the approach to that is unique for Microsoft Graph. There's the concept of the scopes and the roles that you need, but I just emphasize people check out the code, start going through it. If you get confused, reach out for help. Once you have access to be able to start using the graph, you can do so much, so much.
I mean, I basically use it every day. And the same to you if you're using the Azure portal, because the Azure portal is just hitting the MSGraph endpoint a lot of the time.
Yep. Apparently that accent, it's not called a backtick. Some people call it that, but it's called a grave, actually.
Grave mistake might be more correct.
Yes, the presentation code is available in the comments below, but it is also right here in chat. And it is recorded. It will go up eventually. But Morten, great job as always. Can you show us that messages, your new project here, the action items? I'm forgetting the exact name of it.
Yeah, certainly.
Just while we got you.
Yeah, of course.
Straight into code.
I'm actually not sure how much of this is working. I'm still testing a bit, but let's just try and send something. Great.
Okay, just need to import it. There you go.
Yeah.
This is actionable messages.
Hell yeah. Let me just open Outlook just a moment.
Boom, and here's this repository. It's actually pretty slick. I highly recommend you give it a star. We're at 4 stars right now. Let's pump that!
I mean, I'd love to get more users, especially because I actually need some feedback. I'm currently working on making some pre-built message cards for you guys, for easier being able to create some adaptive cards that you can actually just create using PowerShell, send it out to your users. For example, an account verification required for a given service user. I mean, if you're anything like the companies I've worked at, you probably have a lot of a legacy, and some of the legacy nobody knows anything about, at least in your IT team, but maybe some of your users do. Or at least have some system knowledge regarding an application. I mean, you can just send this email out and then have a collection endpoint in your end. So you don't have to have all of the correspondence with the user. You can just send an adaptive card and set up the given actions you actually want answered or sent to your endpoint, or the information at least.
But so hold up. You sent this from PowerShell. Let me just wrap my head around that part, right?
I did, yes. The whole adaptive card is built using PowerShell. Some of them a bit more complex than others. Just to send that one is actually this very long piece of code, about 130 lines. But I'm hoping that I can actually pre-build some of the actions. Already have a few lined up that just needs to be published for easier integration and getting started on the adaptive cards. And another thing coming up, at least in my company, is the new budget that needs to be approved. And I'm guessing everyone is having the issue of actually knowing if your users are using a given product that you're actually offering. So you could just send an adaptive card like this one out to your users. I don't know if I could zoom, I can. For example, Adobe Creative Clouds, saying that we actually have a total of 50 licenses, 32 active users, and just request an answer on how often they actually use the application. They say never, just remove the license. Rarely, you remove it, they can get it again. And then just ask what are they using it for, and which features are they using. asking them how important it is for them to actually perform their daily work, and ask them if they know an alternative to this application if you're actually looking to replace it with something else.
Boom. So these are really practical uses, and you can customize this. But what ends up being created once they fill this out? Like, what happens? What can we do with the output?
Well, when you have filled out, for example, this adaptive card, you could press on Submit Survey. This will actually just make a post request to an endpoint that you are hosting. It can be any API endpoint. You could use function apps, you could use logic apps, you could use Azure automation with a webhook on a given runbook, and just receive the input that they are actually sending. You don't have to have all the back and forth in your emails. Just send this out to them, make them answer the survey, and get your answer straight away and perform from that.
That's pretty
Another
huge.
use case I actually,
because it's kind of like you're basically
as well,
giving someone a GUI, sort of, without having to give them a GUI, right? Right into their mailbox. And if you adopt this, it can be sort of it's a great tool you can rely on going forward to be able to interact with your users and gain feedback and actually take, because a lot of the times I run into issues whenever you need to automate something, but you need someone else's input. It's really hard to create a process that is standalone, that doesn't require you to have to enter something in. This addresses that head on.
Agreed. And my phone is about to die, but just to show that it is also working on a phone, the adaptive card. I can't actually see if damn, it just died. Oh well.
Oh no. Wasn't meant to be.
The adaptive cards also works on your phone as well.
Yeah. Well, awesome. We might have to hear about that.
And also in the browser.
We might have to hear about this one more in the future. So very cool. Well, thank you, Morten, so much for joining us today. If people want to get started with this module, they can install it. If people want your code, we have all that as well. If people are into issues, where can we find you on the internet, man?
Primarily on Discord or LinkedIn as well. Perfect. I'm not on all the cool stuff. Not yet, at least.
No, man, it's been awesome to see you find your way and now contributing awesome projects like this, delivering talks. My gosh, Morten, exciting year, man.
I'm trying.
And yeah, so thanks to Morten. We'll see you around. And thanks to everybody out there for joining us this PowerShell Wednesday. Every single Wednesday, we're here. Great content just like this. Oh my gosh, I see my friend Chris Rivers out there. Hello, my friend. Great to see you. Great to see a few new faces, a few old faces. And we'll be here next week. And I also want to plug a very special podcast coming out on Monday with Don Jones and Jeffrey Snover. Highly recommend you check that out. I can post a link if I can find the link. But awesome, everybody. Well, we will see you around.